Rain poured over the cracked windows of the old Harper house. Thunder rolled far off in the distance as Emily Harper sat curled on the couch, her legs drawn up, clutching a blanket. She was 19, her face pale and delicate, her long dark hair damp from running in through the rain after a shift at the diner. Her parents were in the kitchen, the low hum of conversation mixed with the clatter of dishes. Her little brother Daniel was upstairs finishing his homework. It was just another night, until the crash. A loud, splintering sound tore through the quiet, followed by voices. Deep, angry, male. Emily froze as the front door burst open, banging against the wall. Her mother screamed, her father shouted, but it was already too late. Two masked men, drenched and glistening with rain, stormed into the living room. One grabbed Emily by the hair, dragging her up, her scream muffled by his gloved hand. She could smell his sweat, the sharp tang of cigarettes and rain. "Shut up," he hissed into her ear, pressing something cold and hard against her temple. A gun. In the kitchen, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her father was trying to reach the phone. A gunshot rang out, sharp and deafening. Her father crumpled to the floor, blood pooling fast. Emily's mother let out a high, keening wail. The second man, tall and broad-shouldered, grabbed her and slammed her against the refrigerator. Another shot. Another thud. Emily was shaking violently, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The man holding her gave a rough laugh. "Check the house," he barked to the other one. They found Daniel cowering under his bed. Emily's heart stopped as she heard her brother's pleading voice, thin with terror. Another shot, silence. The men tore through the house, smashing drawers, pulling open cabinets, knocking down shelves. They yanked jewelry boxes open, scattering the contents, rummaging through her father's study. They were shouting, searching for something. Emily's knees gave out and she crumpled to the floor, weeping silently. Finally, the taller one gestured to the other. "Let's go." Before they left, the man who had been holding her turned back and pointed his gun at her face. "Don't tell anyone what you saw," he sneered, "or you'll end up like the rest of them." Then they were gone, disappearing into the storm, leaving behind a house smeared with blood, silence as thick as tar, and a girl who could not scream. The funeral was small and cold. Emily stood between rows of mourners, her body stiff and hollow. She watched as they lowered the caskets into the ground, 3 of them. Her mother, her father, her brother. All gone in a single night. Her uncle, Thomas Harper, arrived late, a dark umbrella over his head. He was her father's younger brother, a stocky man with neatly trimmed gray hair and an easy smile. He hugged her briefly, murmured something about tragedy and justice. His hands were warm, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her stomach clench. Days turned into weeks and then months. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. There was no real evidence. The men were never found. The case went cold. And Emily was left alone in the house, the air stale with the scent of dried blood and dust. Her Uncle Thomas became her guardian. He offered to sell the house, put her in an apartment, but Emily refused. She stayed in the old Harper house because she knew something wasn't right. The men who had killed her family weren't just robbers. They were looking for something. The insurance company paid out, but it was a fraction of what her father's estate was worth. Her father had been a quiet man, a lawyer with a modest firm, but he'd inherited wealth from their grandfather. Thomas Harper stepped in, managing the estate, offering to help Emily navigate the complexities of her inheritance. Emily signed the papers, dazed, broken, and numb. Years passed. Emily scraped by, waitressing at the diner, her dreams of college dissolving into the dull rhythm of survival. But beneath her quiet exterior, a fire smoldered. Every year she pulled out the boxes of her father's papers, studying them late into the night. She traced accounts, cross-checked files, compared signatures. It was slow, exhausting work, but she began to see the outlines of something bigger: hidden transfers, offshore accounts, property deeds with her uncle's name appearing where it shouldn't. It wasn't a robbery, it was a clean sweep. It was him. It was Thomas Harper who had orchestrated the murders, staging the break-in to look like a robbery, eliminating his brother, his sister-in-law, and their only son, to claim the inheritance. Emily's grief sharpened into rage, but she didn't let it consume her. Instead, she folded herself into the role Thomas had given her. She attended family gatherings, smiled politely, asked about his work. She let him think she was the broken, harmless girl he had spared. Meanwhile, she gathered. Every year, she collected evidence. She tracked property sales, traced bank accounts, recorded conversations when he slipped after too many drinks. She visited old colleagues of her father's, pieced together contracts, dug through legal records, interviewed the quiet secretary who had worked at Thomas's firm years ago. She wasn't just gathering evidence. She was weaving herself into the cracks of his life, making sure he never suspected what was coming. 10 years passed. The girl he had left on the floor that rainy night had become a woman, her heart a steel cage around her fury, and the day came when she was ready. Emily's heels clicked softly against the marble floor of the Harper Law offices. 10 years had reshaped her. Her hair, once long and loose, was now pulled back into a tight, professional bun. Her clothes were sharp, understated, pale silk blouse, tailored slacks. She carried herself with calm precision, every step calculated. Thomas Harper's office stood at the end of the hall, door open just a crack. She could hear his voice, booming and self-assured, as he spoke to a client. It was a familiar rhythm, one she'd memorized during the years she had worked her way back into his world. After everything was stripped from her, she had taken jobs he wouldn't see as threats. An assistant at a friend's firm, a paralegal at a rival office. She'd learned his business from the outside, watched him from the edges. And then, 3 years ago, she applied for a job at Harper Law itself. Thomas had barely looked at her resume, hadn't connected the dots. To him, she was just Emily Harper, the niece with the tragic past, the girl he had helped. She let him think she was grateful, let him believe she was still broken. But inside, her mind was a blade. The firm's financial records were now within her grasp. Late at night, when the building was nearly empty, she copied files onto a hidden flash drive. She sifted through contracts, scanned offshore transactions, traced shell companies that funneled the stolen inheritance into his pockets. Each discovery was a quiet victory, a piece of the puzzle falling into place. But it wasn't just numbers and papers. Thomas had a new life now, a wife, Claire, blonde and polished, dripping in jewelry, 2 children, Lily and Sam, perfect on the surface. They lived in a sprawling estate on the edge of town, complete with a pool, tennis courts, and a view of the hills. Claire hosted charity galas and school fundraisers, shaking wine with the elite, while Thomas stood at her side, shaking hands and collecting favors. Emily attended every event she could. She stood in the background, watching, listening. At first she was invisible, just a family member tagging along, but as months turned to years, she became indispensable. Helping with the children's school events, volunteering at the charity auctions, even assisting Thomas's wife with her personal finances. Claire trusted her. So did the kids. Behind the polished surface, though, the cracks were there. Thomas drank too much when the doors closed. Claire's smile was brittle, her voice sharp when she thought no one could hear. Lily had a wild streak she couldn't quite hide. Sam was quiet, always on edge, avoiding his father's eyes. Emily saw it all. She logged every interaction, filed away every slip, every outburst. One winter night, when snow coated the streets in a heavy silence, Thomas took her aside in his study. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon, handing her one with a smile that never reached his eyes. "You've done good, Emily," he said, his voice low, smooth. "I always knew you had a good head on your shoulders. After all you've been through, it's good to see you thriving." She forced a smile, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Thank you, Uncle Thomas. I wouldn't be here without you." He nodded, sipping his drink. "You know, I've always tried to do what's best for family. Keep the legacy intact. Make sure everyone gets what they deserve." Emily watched him carefully, the glass cold in her hand. "Of course. Family is everything." The moment passed and he moved on, distracted by a phone call. But Emily could feel the weight of his words sinking into her skin. He suspected something. She adjusted her approach. More subtle, more careful. She backed off from the deeper accounts, focused on smaller, seemingly insignificant details. A discrepancy here, a missing signature there. She pieced together enough to create a map of his financial crimes, but not enough to tip her hand. Then, one spring evening, she followed Thomas from his office to a quiet meeting with a man she recognized from old photographs. Gerald Blake, one of the two men who had stormed her house that night. The man had aged, his face lined and hollow, but his voice was still familiar, low, rough, dangerous. They met in a shadowed corner of a bar, leaning close, speaking in hurried whispers. Emily stayed back, her phone recording every word from her concealed pocket. She caught fragments: jobs done, inheritance, cleaned up, loose ends. It was the missing piece, proof that the robbery had been staged, proof that Thomas had paid for the murders. The day she decided to act, the air was thick with heat, the sky a pale, unrelenting blue. Emily stood before the old Harper house, now crumbling, its paint peeling, the windows broken. She had kept it all these years, never selling, never cleaning it up. It was her anchor, her reminder. Inside, the walls still bore faint stains, the outlines of blood long scrubbed, but never gone. She sat on the dusty floor, spreading out her notes, files, flash drives, and recordings. She wrote everything down: dates, names, amounts, connections. She arranged the evidence like a final act, a puzzle that, when assembled, would expose everything. Her hands trembled as she packed the files into a box. Then she made the call to a local journalist who had once covered the Harper murders, a man named Cole Warren. Cole had always suspected the case was more than it seemed, but he'd lacked the proof. Emily gave him everything, meeting him late at night at the diner where she had once worked. "You're sure about this?" Cole asked, his voice low, eyes darting around the empty lot. "Yes," she said, "I have everything. I just need you to make it public. All of it." 2 weeks after Emily handed over the evidence to Cole Warren, the first ripples hit the surface. The local paper ran a story on financial irregularities in Harper law, tucked on the second page, nothing explosive, yet. But it was enough to make Thomas twitch. Emily watched from her quiet corner at the firm as he stormed into his office, slamming the door behind him. His voice boomed through the thin walls, calling accountants, barking at lawyers, demanding explanations. His face turned red, his movements frantic, but the paper trail she'd built was too subtle for him to catch. Just a thread here, a discrepancy there. Over the next days, more stories surfaced. Cole's articles dug deeper, revealing shell companies, questionable transfers, and whispers of old crimes. Names started to circulate. Old associates from Thomas's early years in business, some with criminal records that Thomas had kept quiet. Each article tightened the noose around his neck, the town murmuring, neighbors glancing sideways, allies turning wary. Thomas tried to keep control. He held press conferences, brushed off questions, claimed ignorance. Claire stood by him at first, lips tight, hands trembling during their public appearances. But Emily could see the cracks forming, the cold distance in Claire's eyes when Thomas spoke of loyalty, of trust. One evening, Emily found herself alone with Claire at the family's estate, helping her organize receipts for one of the charity foundations. Claire, glass of wine in hand, stared out at the darkening hills. "I always thought he was just ambitious," she said softly, her voice brittle. "But this is something else. What are we going to do if they come after us?" Emily let her voice slip into a soothing murmur. "If you distance yourself, cooperate with the investigation, you'll be fine. The real trouble is his." Claire turned, her gaze searching Emily's face. "How do you know so much?" "I've been watching him longer than you have," Emily said, her voice calm, her heart pounding. "He's not just ambitious, He's dangerous. Claire paled, swallowing hard. What are you saying? Emily leaned closer. I'm saying you need to be ready when the truth comes out. It won't just be about money. It's about what he did to keep it. Things that can't be undone. Claire stared at her for a long moment, then nodded, her shoulders sagging. As summer bled into fall, the town of Marlow, once a quiet, tight-knit community, became a powder keg of gossip and suspicion. Reporters circled the Harper estate, cameras flashing as Thomas barked at them to leave. His business partners withdrew, contracts were canceled, banks called in loans. Emily kept her head down, filing papers, attending meetings, always silent, always patient. Inside, her heart beat faster with each passing day. The trap was closing. Then, Cole Warren called her late one night. They're reopening the case, he said, excitement and fear tangled in his voice. The police found a connection between Thomas and Gerald Blake. And there's more. There's a second man, the one who disappeared after the murders. They're closing in. Emily's hand tightened around the phone. When will they move? Soon. They're gathering enough to make sure it sticks, but they're going to need someone to tie it all together. Someone who can stand up and tell the whole story. Her throat tightened. I'll do it, she said. I'll testify. The day she stepped into the courthouse, the sky was gray, the air thick with rain. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing, voices shouting. Emily moved through them like a ghost, her face pale but composed. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Thomas sat at the defense table, his face drawn, jaw clenched. Claire wasn't there. She had quietly left the estate a week earlier, taking the children with her, her lawyer filing for separation. The prosecution laid out the evidence, financial records, recordings of Thomas's meetings with Gerald Blake, testimony from former employees, bank statements, and offshore accounts. Emily was called last. She took the stand, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Thomas. She told the story of the staged robbery, the murders of her family, the year she spent gathering proof. She spoke of the night her father and mother died, her brother's pleading voice, the blood on the floor. The courtroom was silent, the only sound her calm, relentless words. Thomas's face twisted in fury, his fists clenching, but he said nothing. His lawyer's objections were overruled. Emily presented documents, played recordings, showed the timeline of his crimes. She didn't falter. She had waited a decade for this moment, and she delivered it with cold, quiet precision. When she stepped down from the stand, Thomas wouldn't meet her eyes. After the trial, after the verdict guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and involvement in murder, Emily stood outside the courthouse, the rain drenching her hair, running down her face. Reporters crowded her, questions flying, cameras flashing. She said nothing, she simply turned and walked away, her shoes splashing through puddles. She didn't look back. It wasn't over, not really. The verdict had been read, the cameras had gone quiet, but the weight still pressed down on Emily's chest. The Harper estate had been seized by the courts, its sprawling halls stripped bare, its gardens overgrown. The town whispered about it now, a cautionary tale of greed and murder. Thomas Harper sat in prison, his appeals denied, his name spat like a curse in the halls he used to walk with pride. The remnants of his empire had crumbled into ash. Claire divorced him quietly, moving the children to a different state under new names. No one wanted to be associated with the man who had orchestrated the deaths of his own family. But Emily wasn't looking for applause. She wasn't looking for closure in the legal documents or the crumbling walls of the Harper estate. One late autumn morning, she drove to the edge of town, to the old cemetery where her parents and Daniel were buried. The headstones stood quiet among the fallen leaves, gray and cold in the pale light. She knelt beside them, her hand resting lightly on the cold stone. "Kept my promise," she whispered, her voice low, trembling. "I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. I made sure he paid for what he did." Her fingers traced the letters of Daniel's name, her throat tightening. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said. The wind stirred the leaves around her, and for a moment it felt like something lifted from her chest, a weight she had carried for 10 years, the sharp ache of grief finally softening into something quieter, something bearable. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and turned back toward her car. But she didn't drive home, not yet. Instead, she drove to the Harper house, abandoned now, slated for demolition. The windows were boarded, the front door sagging on its hinges. The walls, once painted bright white, were stained with weather and graffiti. Emily stepped inside, the floor creaking under her weight. She moved through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing in the silence. This was where it had begun, the night of the storm, the gunshots, the lies. She stood in the living room, staring at the spot where her father had fallen, where her mother had screamed, where Daniel's small, terrified voice had echoed from upstairs. It wasn't just a house. It was the tomb of everything she had lost. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal lighter, flicking it open with a soft click. She lit the corner of an old curtain, the flame catching quickly, licking up the fabric, spreading to the broken floorboards. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, filling the air with the sharp scent of burning wood and dust. Emily stood there for a long moment, watching as the flames took hold, consuming the old house, the lies, the memories. She let the fire erase it all. When the heat became too much, she stepped outside, the orange glow lighting her face, the smoke rising into the gray sky. She stood there until the walls caved in, until the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and ash. Only then did she turn away, her face calm, her heart quiet. She didn't need the house. She didn't need the old papers, the files, the memories. Thomas was gone. The truth was known. Her family, though lost, had finally been avenged. Emily Harper walked away from the burning ruins of the past and into the quiet morning, leaving behind the ashes of buried lies.